Welcome to the Speak with People podcast. My name is Jason Raitz. I'll be your host, and this podcast exists to help you improve your communication skills. Whether you communicate one-on-one, to a team, from a stage, or from behind a screen, we know that when we improve our communication skills as leaders, it exponentially changes everything. It improves our relationships, it improves our leadership skills, and it improves our business skills. So let's get ready to dive into this next episode. Well, all of us have experienced grief. It is a universal human experience, and so often it leaves us for a loss of words. So, for the person who is friends or in relationship or works with someone who's going through a deep season of grief, how do we comfort them with our words? What are the kind of things that we say to them? Because sometimes we don't even know what to say. And on the flip side, if we're going through a season of grieving, how do we communicate to the people around us what we're going through? Well, today we're diving deep into this area with an expert and a leader in the field who walks people through grief and helps them find comfort and healing. And I'm just so excited to have this conversation because this is something that will affect every single leader, whether in our lives or our coworkers or our friends or our family. And so I'm honored to sit down with Jason Harris. He's the author of Good Grief, Celebrate Your Life. He's a speaker, grief counselor, and we dive into this topic of communicating during seasons of grief. Jason, thank you so much for being on the Speak with People podcast.
It's an honor to be here. I'm so grateful to have the opportunity to be on here with you.
Absolutely. And boy, I love your name. It's it's nice.
It's a great name, Jason. As a matter of fact, it means one who heals, which is pretty cool.
I love that. I love that. Crazy enough, after this podcast interview, I do another interview with another Jason. So it's a little bit of a Jason day. But hey, before we hop into talking about our topic today in this conversation, give our audience just a little bit of dive into your story, who you are, where you're from, what you do, all that kind of stuff.
Sure. Well, first of all, I'm a preacher's kid. That's not necessarily my identity, but I was raised by a pastor. As a matter of fact, this next week will mark the 63rd anniversary of my father's first sermon.
Wow.
He is 80 years old now. He started when he was 17, and he's still preaching. But that has shaped a lot of my life. Now, I'm not your typical preacher's kid. Some of them get a bad rap because they're so busy trying to get dad's attention that they,
yes,
be like Indians or whatever. That wasn't the case with me. Very good relationship with my dad, good family. And so I grew up in the church, and I was a teenager before it occurred to me. I kind of had a crisis of faith and thought, well, what if my dad was a Buddhist? What if he was an atheist? Of course, I'm going to believe what he believes. And so I really had to go down a path of, well, what do I believe? And really made a serious study of the Bible. Went into ministry myself, 5 years of Bible college, 3 years of seminary, and was in youth ministry for a long time, done some mission work. I've been to some other countries. And so I've always had a passion for helping people, and I love communicating with people. Well, fast forward to about 11 years ago, I've been in sales for quite some time, and I heard of an opportunity when I was moving back to Texas from Wisconsin and Minnesota area that I knew I would get some kind of sales position, and so I was looking at possibly selling roofs, and that didn't work out. And there was this other alternative. I saw this advertisement for pre-need funeral sales. And I thought, that sounds really depressing. That's just awful. Who wants to sell funerals? But I went to this presentation, and it's the first time I heard about even the option of rearranging your own funeral and paying for it. But then when I heard all the benefits of it, I thought, wow, this really makes sense. And then found out that it's one of the least talked about financial planning tools in the world.
Wow.
78% of people have not done this. So almost 4 to 5 people are not prepared. And so I became very passionate about that, and then kind of got myself worked up into the market sales East Texas market sales director for this company. And my job was to go around a huge territory in Texas, massive territory. I was driving 1,000 miles a week, meeting funeral directors and building relationships with funeral homes, and then training agents to sell funerals for their funeral homes before people need them, pre-need. That's what that is. Well, then word got around from funeral directors. It's a very tight fraternity, and they all know each other. But so word got around, this Jason guy, actually, he's a little odd that he actually likes to speak at funerals. He's quite good at it. And so I started being asked to do funerals for people that either didn't have a pastor, didn't have a church home, or whatever else. Funeral directors say, we've got a guy who will speak. And so as it turned out, Jason, about 95% of the funerals I was doing was for people that I did not previously know.
Right.
And I view the funeral service through the lens of celebration. And so how am I going to celebrate somebody's life if I didn't know who they were? So I developed a series of questions, 5 questions, in fact. And then I discovered that if I could get these answered by as many family and friends as possible, not only was it going to be a meaningful and personable service, but it resulted in funeral directors telling me consistently, and I'm not making this up, Jason, we have never heard so much laughter coming out of our chapel.
Wow.
Services. And we're just scratching our heads in here saying, what is he doing in there? And why is everyone... And I promise you, it's not because I tried to turn it into a comedy. That would be disrespectful.
Sure.
But the answers to these questions lend themselves to laughter. And then I discovered, almost accidentally, another very serious, incredible application to these same 5 questions. And then I discovered another, and even another. And I thought, you know what? I need to write this stuff down. And that's what resulted in me writing this book.
Wow.
And so The Good Grief, Celebrate Your Life. So it's been, and now I'm on a mission to train other people to do funerals the way I do funerals. Because not only is there laughter, there's something, and we can get into this in a moment. I care very much about the family after the service.
Yes.
One of my titles, I'm an aftercare specialist, because most families, and your listeners would probably attest to this, literally feel abandoned after the funeral.
Yeah.
And ironically, the family gets the most support when they feel it the least. At the funeral, they're numb. They are surreal. It's a surreal feeling. They're literally, I see them all the time, eyes glazed over, staring at the casket or the urn or the photograph or whatever, looking like, is this really happening? When am I going to wake up? And they're numb. And so I'll be happy to get into in a few minutes a couple of things that I do that's different than what you'd probably see at most funerals, that try to keep the family and friends on the journey with the family on their grief journey.
Absolutely. Wow. Yeah. What important work. In my former life, I was a pastor as well, and spoke at many funerals. And it is amazing when a family can laugh together, especially over those great moments and those stories, what healing it can bring. And so, and I love that title, Aftercare Specialist, because, you know, especially walking people through that grief. It's just so difficult. So to back up, I'm so curious then, wondered if we could dive into those 5 questions. You know, what are those?
That's one of my favorite topics. In fact, I love doing seminars at churches. If any of you have a stage for me to come to, whether that's at your church or a school or a community club or anything, I know that everyone either has grieved or is grieving or will grieve. That's just the fact. Everyone grieves. And so I do a talk literally called 5 Questions That Will Change Your Life.
Wow.
And and what started out is just a series of interview questions I do as an intake. When I'm meeting with a family whose loved one I'm going to do the funeral for, this was just to help me write a eulogy. This was just to help. Actually, the family's writing the eulogy and they don't realize it.
Right.
But I never get up and try to pretend like I knew the person. I never put on an act. In fact, I will usually admit I'm probably the least qualified person in this room to be
Yep.
up here. And while some of you are sitting there saying, who's the bald guy? And why is he talking at my grandma's funeral or whatever? I will just say, because that's true, I didn't know the person. I recruited some help. And so I asked the following questions to these family members. As a matter of fact, ideally, if there's going to be a visitation the night before a funeral, I will literally have on the table a little half sheet of paper that will say, for example, remembering Billy, with a picture of Billy, and then a place for you to put your name. How did you know Billy? And here's these 5 questions. The reason that's so effective also is it actually gives people something to do at the visitation.
Right.
Because I've hugged the neck and said, I'm sorry for your loss, and signed a book, now what?
Right.
I'm just going to stand around and feel uncomfortable and hide behind some flowers or something like that. But when they actually have something they can sit down and write out the answers to these questions, they love that. And then I can harvest those the night before the funeral and work them into the eulogy.
Yeah.
So let me ask you, Jason, if I can put you on the spot, have you lost anyone close to you in your life?
Yes.
Is there someone that you'd mind if we talked about?
Absolutely. When I was 18 years old, my grandmother was killed in a car accident.
Oh my goodness gracious! So an unexpected death, and so would you mind if I asked you the 5 questions about your grandma?
I love it.
All right. Well, the first question. So first of all, what was her name?
Shirley.
Shirley. Okay. And my first question is, what did you call Shirley?
I called her grandma. Yeah.
I love it. And the reason I asked that question, first of all, your audience may not realize I go by my middle name. And so my full name is Nick Jason Harris. And so if I was suddenly killed and someone besides my father actually got up to do my eulogy and they, just were handed an obituary 30 minutes before the service started, they would look at it and go, oh, Nick Harris. Okay. And they would get up and start talking about Nick did this and Nick did that. And everyone in the audience who knows me would be looking around saying, who's Nick? And so I want to know, what did you call this person? But I'm also looking for terms of endearment.
Yes.
So if you called her grandma, then I may make eye contact with the grandkids on the front row and talk about grandma instead of just Shirley and just talking about her name. But also I might hear terms of endearment. There may be nicknames from people they worked with or whatever else. The family sometimes learns things that they don't realize, that their loved one had a nickname at work or something.
Right.
So I will share that. The second question, if you could describe your grandma with just one word, what would it be? Grandma, what? The first one that comes to mind.
Yeah, first one is she's a hard worker. She loved to talk about how much she worked hard, and that she made sure everybody else around her worked hard as well.
I love that. And Jason, I can ask 10 family members that question in an arrangement office and literally get 10 different answers, and all of them are correct. And it's how did you receive this person? How would you describe this person? But my favorite part about this question is then when I'm sharing the answers at the celebration of life the next day, I can look out at the crowd who's gathered and say, what are we leaving out? Just raise your hand and shout it out. I'm not asking for a speech. I'm asking for a word. And so it's like popcorn all over the chapel. The family gets to hear she was amazing. She was beautiful. She was kind. She was generous. She was sweet. She was loving. And all that just rains down on the family. And I love that. And then you can feel the room relax some, like, oh, this is participatory. And people sometimes then feel comfortable enough to firmly plant their tongue in their cheek and say, well,
Yeah.
she was sissy, she was stubborn, or whatever. And
Yeah.
people start chuckling. And by the way, I preface the whole service by saying I want everyone here to use your imagination with me for just a few minutes and not think of this room that we're sitting in as though we're a funeral home chapel, but rather let's transform it into a giant living room. And we're going to sit around with this family and we're going to celebrate Shirley. We're going to celebrate her life. The third question is very simple and more common, but what's one of your favorite memories with your grandma? And it could be a general memory like sure love cooking with her, or going to garage sales, or I'll never forget the time that this.
Oh, wow. That's a great question. Because we live in the city of Detroit, my parents sent me to a private school, and so my dad worked with his mom. And so they drove me to school many days or picked me up. And so they were together all the time. So I was with her a lot. Then when I got my license, boy, I'm sorry, Jason. I wasn't ready for this.
I'm saying I should have warned you. I didn't mean to put you on.
No, it's great. But
yeah.
My grandma and we drove together a lot. And so one of the things that I loved about her was that one of my favorite memories is just all the times we drove together, and she encouraged me to help, support, and encourage my parents. She had a really difficult life.
Dude.
On her wedding day, her brand new husband's father died.
Wow.
On the wedding day, and his mom moved in with them. They never went on a honeymoon, and from day one, and the mother-in-law just did not like her. So she had a very difficult life.
Wow.
And so all those car rides, she just talked to me about supporting my parents and loving them. So that's my favorite memory. Now that I'm a dad of 5 kids, who's old kids to young kids, I just think back how valuable that was as a teenager.
Yeah, you can't place a dollar amount on that, and that's beautiful. And really, the memories, Jason, is where a lot of the laughter comes from.
Yes.
A lot of people's favorite memories include some kind of crazy story, and an example that's in my book, when I first started using these 5 questions about 5 years ago, or maybe 6, I was in an arrangement office at a funeral home, one-on-one with a lady who had just lost her husband less than 24 hours ago. And they'd been married for 26 years.
Wow.
He died suddenly.
Wow.
And so I was asked to do the service, and I began to ask her these questions. And when I got to what's one of your favorite memories? Now, one thing that I never get tired of, time after time after time that I do this, is watching their eyes trail up, accessing a memory, and a smile comes across her face. It's always a smile. And I was anticipating 26 years of marriage, some cruise or some trip, something like that. No, what's your favorite memory? And what fell out of her mouth almost immediately, she said, well, we've got a really steep driveway. And I thought, where is this going? I think, all right. And she said, I think his name was David. I once watched David ride an office chair like the one I'm sitting in, out the garage and down the driveway and across the street just to see if he could do it. That memory took me about 7 seconds to say. And you laugh and you'd have no idea who this guy is.
Yep.
Say that 7 seconds in a room full of people who knew him and knew he was a hold my beer kind of guy. And they watch this, and the place just erupts in laughter. And so that's where, it does over and over and over. And I don't get tired of older people coming up to me after a service saying, son, I've been to funerals for 60 years,
Mm,
and I've never seen or heard anything like I saw and heard today.
I love that.
And I do too. And it's now your memory actually lent itself. It's a good segue to the fourth question, and that's what is a life lesson that you gained having your grandma in your life? And you've really kind of alluded to that already, but if you'd like to re-articulate, what would you say?
Absolutely. Well,
Yeah,
I mean, she just instilled in me that work ethic. You know, I see it in my dad, and yeah, it's pretty powerful.
yeah, that's awesome. You know, that question, when I put them on the half sheet of paper, is probably the one that's left blank the most.
Mm, yeah.
And that either because, wow, I'd really have to be close to this person, but it's also very profound answers that I get there. And I'm just going to warn you now, Jason, the fifth question is the most emotive. Uh, and, and so, but I ask now, I know this was years ago. You said you were 18.
Yeah, it was
When
28 years ago.
yeah, as a matter of fact, this coming Tuesday will be the 25th anniversary of my mama passing
Mm,
away. And so it was on April the 9th, 1999. And so, but we make a very good point, you and I both, about the same time period. The tears are still just right there, you know, because grief, and we'll talk about this, it doesn't go away, it never goes
right.
away. And so, but the fifth question that I like to ask people is, if she could speak to you one more time, what would she say to you today?
Ooh. Wow. Uh, I think it'd still be centered around family, you know, just to take care of my family, to encourage them, to support them, uh, and cherish them. And so I think that's what she would do.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
And that's, you know, you and I, besides having the same name, Jason, I also have 5 kids, and also grown, and it's just hard to believe. Um, but so those are the 5 questions that I
Wow.
use to write a eulogy. But what I just did with you, Jason, was the second application to those questions. When I fly or travel by any means, if you haven't figured this out about me, I love talking to people. And if you're sitting next to me, you're open season. I'm going to talk to you. And unless you put those earbuds in and stare out the window or put a hood over your head and just look like I don't want to talk to anybody, well, then I might wait halfway through the flight before I talk to you. But do you know that I would say 9 out of 10 people, when we exchange just the pleasantries, are you coming or going? Are you here to visit family? Are you, where you from? But what do you do? When people ask me that, and I say, well, it's going to sound strange, but my passion is speaking at funerals. I'm a celebrant. I'm a funeral celebrant, and that's a guy who speaks at funerals. And I also am very passionate about grief support. 9 out of 10 people, as soon as I say that, Jason, they immediately tell me about somebody they lost. That's just the
Yeah.
way people respond to that,
Yep.
and it's a little different, I think, than if I said I was a painter. They don't necessarily say, oh, would you come paint my house? But when I say my passion is grief support, they'll say, gosh, where were you 2 years ago when my mother died?
Mm, yes. Right.
They will say that. And the first time that happened, it was just so organic. It was right after I kind of came up with these questions. What I naturally said was, do you mind if I ask you a few questions about your mom? And do you know, I've never had anybody say, no, I don't want to talk about her. First of all, they brought her up.
Right.
And so I don't probe. It would be one thing if I said, hey, have you ever lost anyone in your family? And they say, well, yeah, I lost my dad. Oh, okay. Well, can I ask you some questions? They'll be like, no, he was an alcoholic and abusive. And we hadn't spoken in the last 20 years of our life.
Wow.
You know,
Right.
it's, so people aren't going to bring someone up like that. But when they say, wow, I really could have used someone like you when my mother died or when my cousin died or whoever.
Yep.
And so it's counterintuitive for us to say, oh, well, let's talk about her, because most people are uncomfortable with grief. Most people are not comfortable. If you're grieving, how about them Cowboys? Let's change the subject and let's
Yep.
talk about something else. But the truth is, and this is so important for everyone who's listening, people want to talk about the person that they lost, and they need to. They literally need to. And so, we're so bad at grief support, and I don't say that in a demeaning way. It's just a fact, and it is because we don't get any instruction on this. They don't teach a class about grief support in high school or middle school or elementary school or college, really. I mean, unless you take some specialized course, counseling course or something like that, it is counterintuitive, and most of us are just going to avoid the subject.
Yep.
Or we say one of the typical cliches, and I'm telling you, if you're listening, if the first two words out of your mouth when someone says, my grandmother just passed away, if the first two words out of your mouth are at least, you need to shut up and not finish that statement. Because when people say, well, at least she's in a better place, or at least she's not suffering anymore, or at least you had her for 50 years, or at least she lived a good long life, or any of that, it's just not going to land well. And so we tend to want to fill up the silence between you and a grieving person with some words of comfort because you yourself are uncomfortable with the silence.
Yeah.
And so probably the chapter I had the most fun writing in my book is Lessons from a Hobbit, a Grief Dog, and a Box of Matches.
Yeah.
The reason, and I can explain two of those metaphors. The grief dog, I actually had the privilege of working with Libby. Shout out to Libby in Belton, Texas at Crotty Funeral Home, the first certified grief support animal in Central Texas.
Wow.
Jared and Deborah Crotty were happy to pay thousands of dollars, not only for the dog, but for her training. And when I do grief seminars in churches, the funniest thing happens, Jason, when I get to this part, when I'm talking about Libby, because people want to know, excuse me, what do I say to grieving people?
Yeah.
Just like you asked a few minutes ago.
Mm-hmm.
And so I tell them about Libby, and I said, if you have given permission, they don't just spring the dog on everybody. Some people don't like dogs or have allergies or whatever. But if you're at visitation, Libby knows who's grieving. She can sense it. And she will amble over to you and sit down at your feet and put her head in your lap and look up at you. And you know what she says? And I say that. I'll say, you know what she says? When people get their notebooks out, and they're like, I'm ready to write down what a certified grief dog said.
Right.
Well, nothing, because she's a dog and dogs don't talk.
Wow.
And the truth, so why is she so effective? And why did they pay thousands of dollars to have her trained? It's because everything about her body language and her expression and her demeanor says, I'm not going anywhere.
Wow.
I'm here. And if we could just be a dog.
Yep.
And where it comes to grief, and if you're listening to this today and you're a bank president or a business owner or an entrepreneur or anything like that, you know how important relationships are to your business, and you know how important, your top clients are and things like that. Trust me, you get this wrong when someone loses a loved one and you say something flippantly like, aren't you over that yet? He died 3 months ago or whatever. You could lose a client for life. I've seen it, and I've talked to too many people who said, I have not spoken to that, fill in the blank, whoever it was, because of a comment. And many times it's someone at work. Many times it may be even a boss. I've heard people say, I quit my job. I want to work for somebody else because it was that abrasive and that offensive and that raw. I mean, and so we really, really have to be careful. So important just to either think about asking them questions or, just letting them talk about their loved one, and you shut up and listen. You get in their bucket with them, and don't just offer what's in your bucket into their bucket. And certainly never, ever compare it to one of your own losses, especially if their loss just occurred. It's not a time to say, well, when my grandmother passed away, which I would, say to you, because we were both talking about our grandmothers, and it wasn't a fresh loss. But the worst thing you could ever say to anybody, or one of the worst things, is, I know how you feel. And there's two reasons for that. Well, there's two things that I always say about grief. And the first one, it's as unique as our fingerprints, Jason. It's There's no people listening to this podcast right now that grieve the same way. There's no two people on the planet. It's like our fingerprints, it's like snowflakes. And so that's why it's so wrong. Don't ever say to somebody, I know how you feel. Ever, ever. Because you don't. You don't know exactly how they feel.
Yep.
And even though, Jason, I've lost my grandmother and you lost your grandmother, I can't say I know how you feel because I lost my grandmother. I didn't lose your grandmother.
Right.
You lost your grandmother.
Right.
And that's the difference. And so if someone lost a baby and you've had a miscarriage, you can't tell them, I know how you feel, because you didn't lose their baby. And you may have been further along. You may not have been as far along. It's just not the same. And so that's one thing I say. And the other one I've already touched on is that it never really goes away. Jason, are you right-handed?
Yes.
Another thing we have.
Yep.
But 90% of us are. And but if I were to suddenly lose my right arm in an accident, well, guess what? Now I'm left-handed, whether I like it or not.
Right.
I didn't choose to lose the arm. If it happened, think about the first week after the loss. I'm going to be in a lot of pain. I'm probably going to be in shock and denial, kind of like when we grieve, saying, I can't believe I lost my arm. But I'm also going to find out really quick that it's very difficult to do some what would normally be things I didn't even have to think about. Now, how am I going to brush my teeth with my non-dominant hand? How are you going to brush your teeth left-handed? You get toothpaste all over your face. And, how am I going to get dressed with one arm? How am I going to write a shopping list? How am I going to do just the most remedial tasks that I could normally do otherwise? And when people are grieving, normal things are hard. And now, 2 months from now, 6 months from now, I may have gotten better at all those things. Now I can get dressed with one arm without even thinking about it. I've figured it out. I've done it over and over. But here's the point. I don't get the arm back.
Right.
I can't generate a limb. I'm not a lizard. The arm's not coming back. So guess what? 20 years from now, I'm never going to say, you know what? I didn't need that arm. The 2 arms are overrated. I'm not going to get there.
Right.
I'm going to say I would give anything to have that arm back for 5 minutes or a day. To have both of my arms would be amazing. And so please be careful about what you say. And I don't know how much time I have, Jason, but one thing I definitely wanted to tell you about the matchboxes. Lessons from a Hobbit, Grief Dog, and a Box of Matches.
Yeah.
Something I started doing about 5 years ago. In fact, I've got one right over here. This is just one that is sitting here. These are just normal kitchen matchboxes, 35 to a box or 32 or whatever it is. And as you can see, I've got a picture on one side, certainly just a label, but it's a photograph. And on the back side, I have to put my glasses on, it has her name. This is Janelle King. And she was born October of 1950, October 28th, and she passed away May the 21st of last year. And I have some of those terms of endearment because she wasn't just called Janelle. She was called Mama, Mom, Grandma. She loved teddy bears. And so I've got that. I can't find my camera. But the reason I make these, I will get up at the end of a service and say, on behalf of the family, I want to thank all of you for being here today. But I'm going to tell you something you may or may not know. The family doesn't really know you're here. Even though they've said on time, thank you for coming, thank you for being here. That's why the funeral home gives them a book with all your signatures in it. so they can look back if they ever do open that book again and say, oh my gosh, so-and-so was there. I didn't remember them being there and whatever. But the truth is, as I mentioned earlier, they're kind of in a fog. They're kind of just numb. And I tell them, look, it's about 2 weeks from now that the first real tsunami of grief is going to knock up their feet. And that's when you're back to work. That's when you've gone back to your life and the phone calls dry up and the people stop coming by and people stop bringing the casseroles and things like that. So here's what I want you to do. Take one of these matchboxes home with you, put it in your kitchen junk drawer, because I know you got one. In fact, some of you have 2, 3, but put it in your favorite one. And throughout the year, as this family is going through all of their firsts, first Christmas without grandma, first Thanksgiving, first Mother's Day, first birthday, all of the firsts, and y'all are gone. Throughout random times of the year, when you go to light birthday candles for a grandson or a nephew or one of your children, or dinner candles, or a fire in the fireplace, or heck, if you're just going for that pair of scissors or a roll of tape and you roll that drawer out and you see her looking up at you, you don't need these boxes to remember her. Everybody's going to remember her. But reach out to her, one of her kids, reach out to her husband, reach out to a family member and say, hey, do you remember those matchboxes that weird bald guy gave us at your grandma's funeral that we thought would never shut up? And I don't remember his name, but we use those matches today. And I just want you to know we really miss her. And I tell them, please don't say anything stupid. Don't say God needed another angel. Don't say at least anything. Just have a story ready and say, you know what? I can't see a teddy bear on a shelf without thinking of her. Or nobody made barbecue ribs like your dad.
Yep.
And I'd give anything to have some of his barbecue ribs again. I really miss him. But that way, and I tell you what, Jason, I never get tired of getting text messages from family members. Sometimes they'll send me a picture of the matchbox that someone texted them 3 months after the funeral, and they'll say, wow, thank you for doing that. Because some people will actually do it. And so we just need to stay on the journey with people who are grieving. And by all means, please don't call them up a week after the funeral and say, how are you doing? You know, grieving people hate that question. It's so natural for us to say, and you mean well by saying it, but there's no real safe way to answer that question.
Yeah.
I mean, you want somebody to say, well, I cry all the time. Thanks. How are you?
Right. Right.
It's just, now say something almost similar and say something like, Jason, where do you find yourself in your grief journey? Or where do you find yourself in your grieving? I tell you, there's a fantastic book I plugged by Nancy Guthrie. I read it before I wrote my book, and it really influenced some of what I put in my book. And she is the co-founder of Grief Share, which is a great ministry. If your church has it, it's a wonderful, wonderful resource for grieving people called Grief Share. You can find it at griefshare.org, put your zip code in, and it'll pop up every church within a 35-mile radius of where you're at based on your zip code. And it's a fantastic navigational tool for grief. But Nancy Guthrie was one of the founders of Grief Share. She and her husband had both lost children. And she wrote a book called What Grieving People Wish You Knew, about what helps and what hurts. And you can Google her, and there's a 20-minute video of her just presenting kind of a synopsis of that book. And I send that video sometimes to friends of family members that are grieving, and it's just helpful advice. You have to be very careful about what you say to grieving people, but the main thing is just listen to them. They want to be heard. They need to be heard.
Yeah. Oof.
Yeah.
Jason, that's so powerful. I mean, this will be, such a helpful conversation for so many folks, because they may not be dealing with it today, but it will at some point. And so to have some preparation, or, geez, how many, funerals do we all attend, and finding the right words to say to families. You just gave us such great gold and wisdom.
I
I just
appreciate
can't thank you enough. Absolutely. Well, before we close the conversation, I ask our leaders, our authors, all of our guests. We're building this library of communication and leadership resources. And so, is there a speaker? I mean, obviously, they don't have to be in the grief your field, but just somebody who you love to listen to. They fill your bucket every time. You love to share their TED Talks or messages or sermons or whatever it is.
Well, it's funny. One of the first persons that come to my mind, just because he's so passionate, he's a pastor. John Piper is his name. He's written dozens of books, and he was the lead pastor at a church in Minneapolis, and is the founder of Desiring God Ministries. But one of the reasons he popped into my mind is there's a Shane and Shane music video
Yes.
called that is tremendous, and I share this many times with the immediate person that is affected by the loss, whether it's a widow or a son or a daughter, whatever, of the person who's passed. Many times I like to share this, and it's a song that he wrote called "Though He Slay Me," and it's based on a verse from the book of Job. But he wrote it after the death of his father, and Shane Bernard did, and just holding his mother, said he tells about the background of the song, and it's a beautiful, beautiful song. It's a powerful song, but about 2/3 the way through the song is a sermon excerpt from John Piper.
Wow. Yeah.
It's very, very powerful.
Yep.
And but I just I listen to a lot of audiobooks. I listen to a lot of podcasts and things like that when I'm in my car. As much
Absolutely.
as I love music, I love to be learning. Try to learn as much as I can.
Is there a podcast right now that you keep going back to that you'd recommend to other leaders?
Boy, I wasn't prepared for that. I've gotten, recently I've been touched a lot by Pete Vargas and Grant Cardone, because I was involved with the 10X stages. The fact they just had a big 10X Growth Con. In fact, today is the last day of it, and it's in Florida. And with Grant Cardone, billionaire real estate guy, but just as far as leadership is concerned, I've been listening to some of this Growth Con just virtually, and I mean, he's had the likes of Peyton Manning and Mike Tyson and Tucker Carlson, and yesterday he had Arnold Schwarzenegger on there, and just their stories and everything. Very powerful stuff. But I was recently, the way I got turned on to them, I was asked to be, well, not asked to be, I saw an advertisement for an audition, the final audition for what was called the Great American Speak Off. Never heard of it.
Right.
And I saw this announcement in February, and they said, we're having the final audition. As it turned out, this is like American Idol for speakers.
Yes.
Literally the same format, 4 judges. Grant Cardone is the Simon, and he says the ugly things and all that. But I was one of 30,000 people that entered that competition. And long story short, I managed to get a golden ticket and was one of the 130 semifinalists.
Wow.
That was at the top 0.02% of the ones who auditioned. And so I thought, I'll take that. I didn't make it to the finals, because by the time we were there in Fort Lauderdale, Florida at this competition, it was very, very good speakers there. Many of them with already established speaking careers, but it was, I learned so much from that. In fact, if I can say this, it really clarified my vision for Morning into Dancing. Morning into Dancing was simply the name of a website just about a year ago, a little over a year ago, and it's an LLC, but I'm it. I am Morning into Dancing right now. But one of the visions it clarified for me is I'm going to, or I've begun a certification course for people who want to learn to do funerals the way I do funerals.
Wow.
And so if you're listening to this, turn your pastor on to to my website, and I'm going to start offering certification. It's just a 1-day course. It's a very, streamlined, but the truth is I had 8 years of Bible and seminary, college and, graduate level, and just had only the one lecture ever about how to do funerals. Pastors are not taught how to do funerals. And that's why so many of them make families angry.
Yeah.
That they really do, because they, for whatever reason, some of them shift into reverend, Jason. You know what I'm talking about. They'll get
Absolutely.
like a mashup of words at a wedding, and we are gathered here today. and it just sounds sad and somber and morose. And then after they butcher the obituary and read names badly, you never hear your loved one's name again, and they preach a sermon. They'll spend the next 20 minutes talking about heaven.
Yep.
And that's great. I'm a fan. I'm planning on going.
Yes.
But that's not what the family needs. They don't need a sermon. They want to celebrate the life of their loved one. Now, I will still get in at the very end of a message. I may say the 3 timeless truths that life is brief and death is certain and we need a savior, but I don't preach a sermon.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to start teaching anyone who would like to learn to do funerals the way that I do. And to be a certified celebrant, funeral homes will pay a certified celebrant, many times up $400 or $500 to do a funeral service, compared to most preachers that get like $20 at the graveside,
right?
At Pentecostal handshake. And there was never, there's no set fees usually. But if you want to become a professional certified celebrant or something that you just do on the side, I can hook you up with funeral homes that need speakers, but that aren't just going to be someone who reads a scripture over someone,
right?
That can really mine the riches of these memories and meaningful, and you can do a healing and memorable service. I keep up with a family right now up in McKinney, Texas, who I did their father's funeral. It'll be 5 years ago this coming October. And we not only are we still close friends, and I didn't know his father before, but they still talk about the funeral. They still talk about the celebration.
I love that.
And so that's what I'm passionate about.
Well, what's the best place we can send people online to find out more about you?
Very simple. I can't even believe this domain was available, but it's simply speakerjason.com.
Love it.
So speakerjason.com is, and there's also a link in that website to my original website, Morning into Dancing. I actually have a logo now. I'm excited about it, but my book is also available on Audible, as read by the author. A friend of mine helped me record that, Steve Casillo, in his podcast studio here in Mansfield. And so he helped me record it and upload it. So it's available in an Audible form as well. And tomorrow morning, I'm actually going to be doing a book signing here in Mansfield from 9 to noon. And
wonderful.
So,
well, goodness. Well, thank you so much. We'll put all that in the show notes, and we'll put all that in the Facebook group, and we'll encourage our Speak with People community to check out your book and your website. Jason, thank you so much for your time today.
Jason, I really appreciate it. And I tell you what, there's nowhere I won't go. I don't care what state you're in.
That's right.
Or what you're in. I'm happy to come and do a training one Saturday for any pastors or lay people or postmen, anyone who would like to learn how to speak at funerals and to do it better.
Perfect. Well, thank you for joining us on another episode of the Speak with People podcast. We hope that you were encouraged. We hope that you were inspired and challenged to improve your communication skills. I want to thank you again for being a part of the Speak with People podcast community. Make sure you don't miss out on being a part of the Speak with People Facebook community group. Just head to Facebook, type in Speak with People, scroll down and join our community, because every single day we're encouraging each other, we're helping each other to improve our communication skills. Thanks again, and we'll see you in the next episode.